All right, thanks, Nate, for that demonstration. Let's move on to discuss file key details. I will provide an overview of the background and essential information for each file type submitted during Fall 1. So we'll start with the SSID Enrollment file, also known as the SENR file. While today's session offers a condensed overview, we encourage you to explore the CSIS YouTube training channel for more in-depth guidance. Each file type is covered in a dedicated video, typically about 1 hour long, offering detailed explanation and examples. All right, let's begin by reviewing some key points about the SSID enrollment or the SENR file. So the SENR file is essential for establishing ownership of a student record. So this ownership is what allows your LEA to submit additional records for a student in CALPADS. The ownership period is defined by the enrollment start and enrollment exit date in the SENR record at your LEA. So without this ownership, no other student data submissions can be made. The SENR is also used to determine cohort inclusion for secondary students for the adjusted cohort graduation rate and cumulative enrollment. The SENR file includes important data elements such as district of geographic residence, exit reasons, and enrollment status, such as primary, secondary, or short term. So now I'm going to talk about some exit reasons and the impact of these exit reasons. So exit codes in SENR file are especially important as they help determine graduation status, dropouts, and completers, and are used to denote returning, transferring, and matriculating students. Examples of exit reason codes include T160, transfer to another California public school, T180, transfer to a private school in California, T200, transfer out of California to a public or private school, but still within the US. And some other examples that are most commonly used at the end of the academic year are E155, year-end enrollment exit, and this is an exit reason that is used when the student is expected to return the next academic year. And then E230, which is a completer exit. This is most commonly used for graduating 12th grade students or matriculating students from, example, middle school to a high school. So a full list of student exit reasons is available in the CALPADS code set documentation. So now let's move on to the SINF file. So the student information file record is required for all students in CALPADS. So in fact, when you submit an SENR record for the first time for a student, a shell SINF record is created in CALPADS, which you have to be sure to update. SINF file contains demographic and address information about each student, and it is used for purposes listed on this slide. SINF data is used to indicate race and ethnicity, legal and preferred names, gender and gender changes, address history, direct certification matching at state level. It is also used to identify students who are Title III eligible immigrants and include students in socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroups. So moving on to the next file, it's the student program file or the SPRG file. In Fall 1, the SPRG file identifies students who are eligible for or participating in a specific state or federal programs, reporting EL instructional strategies, and help determine inclusion in socioeconomically disadvantaged subgroups. So submitting student program SPRG data to CALPADS on an ongoing basis as the change occurs rather than waiting for the certification window is strongly recommended, and it is a best practice for several critical reasons related to data quality, funding, and accountability. So again, SPRG records track student eligibility and participation in various state and federal programs. So these records should be submitted and updated continuously throughout the year to ensure students receive appropriate services. Programs that are collected in Fall 1 are listed in the orange table on this slide. Some examples are FRPM, so free and reduced price meals, program codes 181 and 182, the GATE program, program code 127, homeless program, program code 191, tribal foster youth, program code 193, and language instruction programs, program codes 300 to 306. So other programs that students may be participating in will not show up in Fall 1 reports, but will appear in the end of year reports. So even if you submit the data now, these programs will show up at the end of year reports and not in Fall 1. So this includes Title I, Part 8 programs, armed forces, pregnant and parenting, and so on. So you may also notice that homeless program records 191 will appear in both Fall 1 and end of year reports. So as a reminder, CALPADS homeless program records are required to close at the end of the school year or as a change occurs for a student. So the end date needs to be within the student's enrollment dates. And you can see Flash 325 for further guidance on closing out homeless program records. All right, so moving on to the Student English Language Acquisition File, or the SELA file. The SELA record is expected for all students in all enrollment types, primary enrollment codes, short-term enrollment codes, and in grades TK to 12. So the Student English Language Acquisition File is used to report the English language status of every student and not just English learners. So this information is essential for determining assessment eligibility, funding allocations like LCFF, and support services for English learners. Every student is assigned one of the following statuses: EO, English only; IFEP, initially fluent English proficient; EL, English learner; RFEP, reclassified fluent English proficient; TBD, to be determined, and this is used when a student's status is not confirmed yet; and ADEL, adult English learner. So when you're preparing to submit or update a SELA record in CALPADS, it's important to gather all the necessary information from your English Learner Services Department ahead of time. So this includes the English language acquisition status, the primary language, the ELAS status date, and a correction reason code if applicable. So correction reason codes are especially important when making changes to a student's ELAS record, as ELAS changes follow a specific sequence. For example, EL to RFEP. If you need to change a status out of sequence, you must include a correction reason code. These correction codes can only be made via online maintenance. And always consult the When to Report a SELA Correction Code section in the CALPADS user manual to ensure you're using the correct code for your scenario. So in this slide, the chart shows a logical sequence of an ELAS code. The first step for an LEA to take regarding ELAS is to distribute and collect a home language survey for students. The home language survey should be administered to a student only once upon a student's initial enrollment in a California school. If the home language survey indicates English or American Sign Language is the sole language spoken at home, the student will be given an ELAS of English only, or EO. If the home language survey indicates a primary language other than English or ALS, the student will get an ELAS of TBD, to be determined, until they are given the initial LPAC assessment. So students may only remain in a TBD status for 30 days. So if a student is TBD and takes the initial LPAC assessment, the results will place them in either one of the two statuses. If the initial LPAC indicates the student is English proficient, the student will be placed in IFEP status. If the initial LPAC indicates a lack of clearly defined English language skills, the students will be placed in EL status. If a TK to 12 student with an ELAS of EL becomes 22 years old, they will be placed in ADEL status. If a student with an ELAS of EL is tested with the summative LPAC and the results indicate English proficiency, the student will be placed in RFEP status. So the arrows on this slide show the logical progression of the different ELAS statuses. If a change is being made to a student's ELAS that is not represented by an arrow on this slide, it is not a logical sequence and a correction code must be used. So the requirement to test students with the initial LPAC within the 30 days of enrollment does not apply to TK students. LEA should continue to submit the SELA file and populate the ELAS status as TBD if the home language survey indicates a primary language other than English or ASL. So the TB status will remain with the students until they are tested with the initial LPAC when the student is enrolled in kindergarten. CALPADS is no longer sending TK enrollment records to TOMS, so therefore they will not show up in TOMS as eligible for the LPAC testing. So in this slide, you will find valid use of ELAS correction codes, which can also be found in the CALPADS user manual and provides the scenarios where correction codes are appropriate. So these correction codes are only applicable when prior status is being corrected, has a date on or after July 1 of 2018. So correction codes, again, must be done via online maintenance and before the students take the summative LPAC test. Next up, I'll go over students with disabilities, and there are 4 file types in Fall 1. So the first file is Students Disability Status File, or the SWDS file, the MEET file, the Plan file, and the Services file. So I'll start with the Student Disability Status file. So this captures a chronological history of a student's eligibility for and participating in special education, and if not eligible and not participating. The file also captures the reason why using non-participation reason codes. So the students with disability status allows us to determine if a student is eligible and participating on a specific report date and therefore included on reports. So this identification is important because Fall 1 only includes data for students with active plans. So we look at the most recent students with disabilities record on Census Day. This year, it'll be October 7th. The student must have a status of eligible and participating, regardless of the LEA. The record must meet these date conditions to appear on the Fall 1 report. So status effective start date is on or before the report date. Status effective end date is on or after the report date and or is still active. Okay, so moving on to the next file. So next is the Special Education Meetings file, or the MEET file. It captures key information about individualized education program meetings, or IEP meetings. These records document initial evaluations, plan reviews, eligibility reevaluations, amendments, and delays. For CALPADS reporting, LEA should submit the MEET record with the date the meeting was initiated, even if the meeting is incomplete at the time, and additional meetings are scheduled to finalize the IP. So the MEET records are used to track initial evaluations for both Part C and Part B, plan reviews, eligibility reevaluations, initial evaluations that are pending and are not overdue, initial evaluations, plan reviews, and eligibility reevaluations that are pending and are now overdue, along with an associated meeting delay code. So MEET records are used for monitoring reports 16.7 and 16.8. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it requires IEP teams to monitor and document student progress. Monitoring a student's progress allows IEP teams to determine whether the services and supports provided are an educational benefit to the student. So the next file is the Special Education's Plan file. The file captures essential details about the student's individualized education program or IEP, individualized service plan or ISP, or IFSP, individualized family service plan. It includes information such as program setting, general education participation, parental involvement, transition goals, and the date that a specific version of a student's plan became effective. Key data elements include primary disability, plan type, program setting, general education participation, categorized percentage of the time a student is in a traditional non-special education learning environment, and transition planning. So moving on to the Special Education Services file. It captures the specific services outlined in a student's active special education plan. These services are a critical part of documenting how we meet the needs of students with disabilities. While the services data is not included in Fall 1 reports, the California Department of Education is obligated to monitor and enforce LEA responsibilities under the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Each services record provides details about the type of service being provided, the service provider, the location where the service is delivered, and the frequency and duration of these services. So the services records help identify students who are not receiving the services outlined in their IEP and systemic issues within LEA related to service delivery. So the 4 special education file types are not submitted directly to CALPADS. Rather, the SPED data is entered to the local education data system and transferred directly into CALPADS from the SEDS via an API, an application program interface. The API is what allows this automated interaction between the local SEDS and CALPADS. This allows for faster processing of students with disabilities record. The local SED system will provide a report after each instance of the nightly process with information on rejected records. So guidance from both CSIS and the CDE is to make changes to the SPED data in the SED system rather than in CALPADS to mitigate against discrepancies between the two systems and triggering of potential errors. So this is because there's a legal component to special education reporting, and discrepancies between the two systems can result in litigation. So this concludes our discussion of the key details of files for Fall 1. Nathaniel will take over and provide a live demonstration of the Fall 1 data submission.